I am an African.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Africa for Dummies podcast, where we keep everything Africa. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you can follow us on all links. If you're listening to our podcast, be sure to leave us a review. If you're watching the video, be sure to leave us a like. Please subscribe and follow us on all platforms if you want to be updated on the things going on the continent. And this week has been very dramatic. It's been one thing after the other. Right after the Congo summit that we are also going to dive into soon, with the EAC and the SADC meeting that occurred. Now we have Donald Trump cutting aid to South Africa because of a land reform act. And before we dive into it, of course, Mr. Zenge, co-host with the most, how are you doing?
No, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, it's been a busy week, extremely busy week on the continent. So we've done quite a lot on the DRC, the situation in the DRC. That's a whole story in itself. Just check it out, like, subscribe, and keep updated.
Yeah. So basically, as I mentioned before, we're talking about the Land Reform Act, and that ruffled some feathers. Basically, the U.S. president cutting aid to South Africa, and yeah, and I think that was most. I think, and he also issued out, basically gave refugee status to Afrikaans people, which in of itself is a bit of a contradiction, right?
Highly problematic situation going on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm not too well versed in South African politics, but maybe you can shed some light on basically
Yes.
Afrikaans people, because
Right.
I think I saw a YouTuber who I hopefully I can maybe share the link for, and maybe we can snipe this, cut some of his videos there. But he
Yeah.
clip his videos, but he said, what does he mean by Afrikaans? Does he mean people
Yeah,
that
I think that was
speak?
Dan Coder. I love
Yeah,
watching
exactly.
that.
Dan Coder actually broke this down really well. We'll link his video down
Mm.
below. But he mentioned, like, what does he mean? Is it Afrikaans? People that speak Afrikaans, or like
Yeah, because
what does? Yeah, go ahead.
it's
Sorry.
vast. I mean, there's lots of people that speak Afrikaans. Many South Africans learn Afrikaans in school, even black South Africans.
Yeah,
Mixed race South Africans also speak Afrikaans. Mixed race slash colored South
colored,
Africans.
which is a
Doesn't
term.
always,
So,
yeah, mean the same thing, but yeah. Uh, so Afrikaans are primarily people of Dutch descent, right? They're people that came from the Netherlands about 500 years ago, and were part of the white settlement of South Africa, the colonization of South Africa. Afrikaners are primarily the people that were behind the National Party, which was the party that led South Africa through apartheid from the 1960s to the 1990s. So yeah, those are essentially Afrikaners. I mean, there are various things that people affiliate with Afrikaners. The braai,
yeah,
like having. Hey, I like that. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
most people like braais anyway.
sure.
Braais, the farmlands, which is why this issue has actually risen. 70% of South Africa's land is owned by less than 7% of the population, which are white people.
White minority. Yeah.
Yeah, so it has always been a situation of real contention, especially after South Africa ended apartheid in 1994 with the first democratic election. It has been part of the anti-apartheid struggle. In the 1955, there was what's known as the Freedom Charter, which the ANC and other sort of anti-apartheid movements agreed on, which includes land, the right to land, which was, quote, stolen. So when they say stolen, they're referring to the 1913 South African Land Act, which quite simply is like expropriating land away from black people to white people. Formally, that's what the Land Act did in 1913.
That's interesting. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah. It goes back. So essentially, basically, the Boer Wars, in a nutshell, were English settlers in South Africa and Dutch settlers in South Africa fighting over primarily black people's land. Or black people were there first, right? Black and Khoisan people were there first. Khoisan were the first inhabitants of what is now South Africa. So you have a situation where this land, and then after that, the Boer War, the flag of South Africa, the apartheid flag of South Africa, was a combination of English, the Cape Colony, which became British, and then the Free State, the Orange Free State, and so on and so forth, Transvaal, all came together and formed the Union of South Africa. And there was sort of like this feeling of otherism, like the English were superior, and then the Dutch were like beneath them. And then after the Boer War, there was several social, and the funny thing is they refer to this Land Act, which we will explain just now. Well, we're going back in history right now. So there was a lot of like otherism, and there's this idea that the ANC and current South Africa is socialist. When during apartheid and even before apartheid, when South Africa was just a colony of the British Empire, there was various forms of socialism or welfare state that was catering solely for white people, right?
Yeah.
Solely for white people. So the border bond, which is like a brotherhood type of financing situation, just for Afrikaner people, like scholarships, loans at very low to no interest rates. So it was very much like a communal welfare system. There was even an article that went so far as to say ANC didn't do socialism well. They should have learned from, like apartheid. Afrikaners were generally less off. There's a huge famine that the British caused after the war on Afrikaners. So there's a lot of folklore and redemption and sadness from the Afrikaner point of view towards British. Like, we are going to prove ourselves that we are equal to you. So there's a lot of movements to educate Afrikaners. Stellenbosch is a premier Afrikaner educational institute. That's why Stellenbosch, Dr. Stellenbosch came of age as the Afrikaner Institute of Excellence, right? So many Afrikaner leaders and politicians came from those universities. And eventually, after World War II, which many Afrikaner hard-right parties didn't want to be involved in, because it's like, oh, British Empire, that time South Africa was part of the British Empire.
Right.
So it's like, oh, British Empire is calling us to fight for the motherland. Let's go and fight Hitler. Afrikaners was like, I don't really hate Hitler that much. Like, why do we have to do this? So there was resistance. So there was the Unionist Party, which was led by Ian Smart. Was it Jan Smuts? Yeah, Jan Smuts. I'm confusing him with the other guy.
Ian Smart.
Yeah, Jan Smuts. So, or if you go to South Africa in Johannesburg, the international airport is called OR Tambo. But before that, it was called Jan Smuts. He was a World War II hero. He led South Africa as prime minister through World War II. He was pro-British, essentially. He was like, at that time, Britain was a dominion, like Canada, right? And then Afrikaners came into power. They beat the Unionists after World War II. They came into power, and this is after several years of, emancipating and enhancing their skills in education, finance, and then eventually politics. So I think 1961 or so, South Africa a national party came on, and they ran a campaign for South Africa to be a full-on republic, sever ties with the British Empire. And so South Africa became a republic in the early 1960s. So the leaders like Verwoerd were the people that were the architects of separate development, and that became apartheid, right? And things just became even more stronger, even more harsher than just simple segregation. It was like full on. We'll massacre you if you come here. You have to have a pass to come here. Don't date. Don't, like, every single thing. So yeah, that's the background of the Land Reform Act and apartheid. There was Bantu Stance, right? So when you talk about land, there was also Bantu Stance. Apartheid idea of separate development was this sort of creation of a fake independent African country, but it's basically an excuse to say, Africans, go to your villages and create a little country. You can come as migrants into the rest of the country. Like, so there was a Botswana Bantustan, which is people of Tswana heritage.
Tswana speaking.
Yeah. So basically, just the tribal lands of the Tswanas was created as a little vassal state. There were like 4. little vassal state, and they'll give him a little president. Everything, all the foreign relations of that state will be controlled by Pretoria, by the South African, white South African government. And then they'll have a black leader there in that little Bantu Stance. They'll control everything except foreign affairs and security, the most critical things. No one recognized those little countries. Apartheid was trying to make it sound like we know we are progressive, we are living in harmony, when really it was basically migrant labor who used to go to South Africa all the time. And it was just a vassal state of South Africa, more or less. And so when you talk about land, that's also an issue. So that's how we come down to 1990. Mandela goes to jail and then he gets free. In fact, it will be almost 35 years since 1990, since Mandela got released. Like I think got released on the 11th or the 12th of February in 1990.
Robben Island, right? Was it?
Yeah, from Robben Island.
Yeah.
Although he went to Pollsmoor prison in Cape Town, the mainland, in the last few years. But yeah, so now we have the Land Act. There's a great feeling in South Africa that the way in which South Africa's economy has been done, and we had Sizwe Mpofu Walsh here. Maybe we could link him up here in the episode. Link his episode. The nature of South Africa is not satisfactory to a lot of South Africans, economically especially. South Africa is the most unequal country on the planet. Yeah.
It's funny, you can actually see it. You can actually see it. Like it's literally
visible.
Visible, yeah.
It's right in your face. The ironic thing is, you go to Cape Town and you see the most expensive real estate in Africa, right next to, like, not far from, literally, it would be shacks, like, metallic or, metallic sheets.
I think that's where I saw like a drone shot, and you can literally see like a line, like literally dividing the, and you can see the inequality that literally exists between the two.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. So you have a situation where Switzerland was built for the white people, and then hell was for the black people.
Yeah.
Right? Like they built a little. If South Africa didn't care about white people, it would be Switzerland. Now you come into power as Mandela, as Thabo Mbeki, as Zuma, as Ramaphosa. What do you do? Because now you have a situation where there's a little Switzerland that was created in the middle of misery. Right? A few black people were able to, a black middle class of able to make it, but this is nowhere near enough, right?
Yeah.
And one of the key elements of colonization is land.
Yeah.
Land. Like people were actually dispossessed of their land, fertile land. So the majority of the land is owned by white people, and the government is trying to find ways in which to redress this issue. The constitution does not allow for land to be compensated for land to be taken without compensation.
Yeah.
But this act here now, so this act basically, they tried to change the constitution, but it wasn't successful because the ANC.
I'm just gonna give like a layman's understanding from my perspective, right?
Yeah, go on.
And then you can throw in the facts, right? From my understanding, this is an act that exists in almost every country, if I'm not mistaken, in the sense that the idea is not to simply take land from people, but really it's to, if land is idle, and for example, if they want to build like a road or whatever, and you own that particular land, but it's not being used, the government can simply take it and build the road that they wanted to build in the interest of the people. They can't just go up to you and say like, "Oh, you're a white person, let's take this land," which to my knowledge has not happened. Right?
Yeah.
So you can go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the hysteria that has been built around this land act is sort of like the white plight of farmers being killed, farmers being land grabs to a degree happening, but this is not state backed. These are simply thugs who are coming onto farms and attacking their farm owners. But this is also this has fueled a lot of white fear and white flight. So then you have the government of South Africa is trying to work on this land reform thing. It died down a bit for a while, but the Economic Freedom Fighters President Julius Malema resuscitated this call for land. And it was at the peak of this time where people thought that Mandela didn't do enough for independent South Africa. So South Africa, as I said before, like the apartheid system was a socialist system for white people. Right? People like to say, oh, the apartheid system wasn't socialist, and then ANC was socialist. ANC is far more capitalistic than the apartheid government, right? There's a lot of privatization going on, and Sizwe Mpofu writes about this in his book Apartheid. I think, what is it called again? Apartheid has not ended, something like that. Apartheid did not die; it was privatized. Basically, that was his point. So now, after trying to change the constitution and failing, the ANC decided to introduce an act. And so this act is basically called the Expropriation Act of 2024, which provides a legal framework for expropriating property for public purposes or in the public interest, as Nathan said. It repeals the Expropriation Act of 1975, which was during apartheid, so that is, that doesn't really do much, and aligns expropriation laws with Section 25 of the Constitution of South Africa, which governs property rights and land reform. So the key provisions of the act, so the purpose basically is to expropriate property for public purposes. So as you said, infrastructure in the public interest, and establishes rules for compensation. So there are some cases where
you would get compensated.
Zero, you can get compensated, and cases where you cannot get compensated, and it must be considered in an equitable fashion. And then the constitutional basis of this is Section 25 of the Constitution that states that no one may be arbitrarily deprived of property. Remember, there's another section that says land can only be divided if it's compensated, right? The Freedom Charter, which is not the Constitution, in 1955, sought for redistribution of land for those who work on it. By the way, that's what the Freedom Charter says. For those who work on it.
Okay.
Which is an interesting factor. So basically, but it also has problems in itself when you say land will be divided to those who will work on it. So only farmers or who work for farmers, but not people who have actually been dispossessed of the land. I'm not saying, someone in Johannesburg needs land. Taumbeke even said this, is like, I live in Johannesburg. Why do I need land?
Yeah.
Like, but there's always different things, there's always different arguments. Like, do I need to work on the land? Or do I need to be in a rural area for me to have access to land? Because if you have been dispossessed of land, how do you even quantify which relative is it that was dispossessed of the land? This is a grand thing, and how far do you go? Do we go to Khoisan? Khoisan people? Because they are the original South Africans. Right. And then, Bantu Expansion, other black people from across Africa came down south. The Xhosas, the Zulus, the Vendas, the Pedis, Twanas, so on and so forth. And then the white people came, right? So this is, there's always various options. There's who is the original person that has been dispossessed? Should we give it to city people? Should we give it to people who work on it, as the Freedom Charter says? Should we compensate people, as the Constitution says? Or should it be in public interest, and we'll judge case by case on whether or not this compensation qualifies? Because the compensation will not be real estate levels, right? Free market type of, expropriation. So the next part, expropriation must be for public purposes or public interest, and with just an equitable compensation. Equitable compensation. This is not market, determined by various factors. They also include market value, history of property acquisition, state investment in the property's current use and purpose of expropriation. So one of these could trump the other, even, powers of the minister. The Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure has the authority to expropriate land. I think that minister, funny enough, is from the DA, which is
right.
a political party. A political party that's in South Africa, that's in coalition with the ANC. The DA is not the most amicable to this land reform. The minister may also delegate these powers to other officials. And then the expropriation procedure, there will be an investigation and evaluation. Authorities must assess the suitability and value of the property. There should be consultation with relevant government bodies, municipalities, and individuals who have been affected. Notice of intention. Before expropriation, a notice must be served to property owners, mortgage holders, and right holders. Objections and mediation. So there should be, dialogue for
Mm-hmm.
people to be allowed to object and dispute this situation. And notice of expropriation, a formal notice is issued transferring ownership of the possession. Now, when it comes to compensation, which is the big one, compensation must be just and equitable. Payment includes interest if delayed. If the property has mortgage, part of the compensation may be used to settle the debt. Compensation must be deposited with the master of the High Court if the owner cannot be found or refuses payment. Urgent expropriation. In cases of urgency, the government can take immediate possession, provided fair process is allowed. This is probably the spooky part, that the government can also withdraw. If the government doesn't need the property, the expropriation can be withdrawn. Offences and penalties, fines and penalties apply for obstruction or non-compliance with expropriation procedures. And so, yeah, this is the general gist. They go extensively to talk about the fair process, allowing people to dispute, to negotiate, to mediate. There's various factors that influence the level of compensation. Sometimes no compensation. And so, yeah, this is why they say it complies with the Constitution. But in response, lobby groups that promote Afrikaner interests, such as AfriForum.
AfriForum, the infamous.
Yeah, this name has been floating around all
Yeah.
over social media. Have led, a campaign for years into Western countries and capitals to lobby lawmakers to basically say, "Oh, South Africa is in threat. White people, there's a white sort of genocide almost, and South Africa should be punished in one way or the other, or like look into this issue." And that led to the great Donald
Donald
Trump.
Trump, right? And
Yeah.
what was interesting is what you're talking about, because it sounds like, except for the part where there's urgent situation, sounds like they're actual checks and balances. They don't just come in and be like, yeah, we're taking. And from my perspective, I don't like, what was the other option? Was it to leave this law that literally was from the apartheid era to simply exist, or
Mhm.
did it need an update, right? And this is the thing that makes it so horrible, because Donald Trump has now made it like, because the ANC does some bad stuff, but now you have to defend the ANC because 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 of what Donald Trump was talking about. But just to get into what Donald Trump was talking about, so Donald Trump basically hopped out
Yeah.
of a plane and basically was like, "Yo, what's going on in South Africa is really bad. What they're doing." He didn't mention the group of people that were being, well, he said were being sort of, mistreated. But he said what they're doing is horrible. Is horrible. They're doing horrible things, and basically they're going to cut aid. And on top of that, he also added refugee status to Afrikaans people. So we kind of get who he was talking about when he was talking about that, horrible things are happening. But the thing that I think that makes it so frustrating is that that's not what this thing is doing. It's not taking away land from 8% of the population. By the way, those numbers are like, just by themselves, like, are crazy, right? 8% on 70% of the arable land is it's crazy, but nobody's doing that. But nobody's doing
Yeah.
that, right? But then you're seeing this outpour from the media of like, "No, this is horrible." And I think I just saw a post that Marco Rubio isn't going to attend the
Marco
G7
Rubio
meeting.
is the Secretary of State, the
Yeah,
top diplomat.
he's not going to go to the G7 meeting simply because of South Africa, and simply because
G20.
of G20. Sorry, because of the law, which doesn't do what he thinks it's doing. And this is the frustrating
Mm.
thing. And I think another aspect for me, I don't know if I can say this. Maybe if I'm wrong, you can guide me, Zengi, I guess. But the group of people, I think a small population of the group of people that are being talked about, right? So, for example, white South African farmers have done
Mm.
some really bad things in South
That's
Africa.
what he said.
No, I'm saying myself. Like, I'm just saying,
All
like,
right, because Trump did say there's really bad things happening in South
exactly,
Africa.
exactly. But I'm just saying also, like, from the other perspective, right? Like, just looking at the outreach that's going on against South Africa, like literally pulling aid, which is fine. It's like, that's taxpayers' money. I'm not against that, me personally, right?
Yeah.
Um, but my thing is just the narrative that's being painted here. And I think if you look at for instance, the like, what I was trying to say was, South African farmers, if you go in media and on court cases, there's things that these South African farmers have done to black workers that are outrageous. I think one famous one was there were some South African farmers that were literally to punish their workers, whatever that means, they would literally bury them in like quasi coffins in the hot sun. Nobody said anything, right? When these guys do something, nobody says anything.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
because there was
But
no
then
sanctions, there was no
here's
offer of asylum for Black South
there's
Africans
no offer of asylum,
or
no
rural South
nothing. No,
Africans, or
this was
yeah.
just
No,
a regular news story. And sorry, I'll let you go for a
go
second.
ahead. Yeah, no
But
worries.
so it's like okay, that's fine. But the moment you don't even read into the actual law, you just heard the word expropriation, and you just already like trigger happy and like you flipped out, and that
Yeah.
for me is the thing that's like really astonishing to me because I'm seeing very similar very similar not rhythm but um similar pattern to
Mhm.
what happened in Zimbabwe to a certain degree.
I was just gonna say the Zimbabwe
Yeah,
factor.
because
The-
with Zimbabwe you have
yeah.
a very similar situation where it's like okay, people have gotten independence. There was agreement on the table. Another British
Mm.
prime minister comes in. He says, "Screw that agreement." Right
The
now,
past is the past.
the past is the past, and then you have these white farmers doing very bad things to black workers,
Yeah.
right? And the moment they get together and they're like, you know what? No, we have to stand up for ourselves. BBC now goes crazy. Oh, there's a thing going on, and Zimbabwe has never recovered from that.
Yeah, and the thing is,
Yeah.
the problem here that really pains me is it's so easy to become a pariah state when you affect interests of sort of global north countries,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's so easy. Do you know why? Because the Zimbabwe factor is very interesting because minimum, and I'm really being conservative here, minimum 2,000 Ndebele people died in what many consider a genocide or
Yeah.
vast massacre.
Yeah.
Figures vary, but the most minimum figure is 2,000. The figure goes up to 20,000, mind you. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It was an attempt at ethnic cleansing in a particular area by people that were sanctioned by Mugabe. Mugabe, that was in the 80s. Mugabe was feted by every country in the global north, right? He was feted by Ronald Reagan.
Mm-hmm.
There's video footage of his,
Yeah.
of him, being lauded for
Yeah.
being Mandela before Mandela. That's how he was described. Princess Diana went there. They considered him for a knighthood. I think they did give him a knighthood. They considered him for a Nobel Peace Prize.
Wow.
This was known. This was on New York Times. This was on BBC. Journalists reported this stuff,
Yeah.
right? And then, come late 1990s, early 2000s, I think around less than 15 white people were killed by thugs who were aligned with Mugabe.
Mm-hmm.
And Mugabe allowed people to get white land. Then he became a pariah state.
Yeah.
Minimum 2,000 black people are totally killed and raped and so on. But Mugabe is a saint. But once you touch even,
One
one white person, then all of a sudden it's, whoa, what the hell is going
going
on?
on. Yeah.
Like you are now therefore a pariah. You are Kim Jong-un
Yeah.
officially. And so now this is the type of thing they're trying to manufacture around South Africa. Land reform, the Zimbabwe boogeyman story. Yes, Zimbabwe did it wrong. I admit.
Yeah.
It was
Zimbabwe.
terrible.
No,
It
that's
was
Zimbabwe. It
terrible.
was
There's
bad. Yeah.
human rights violations. They didn't treat white Zimbabweans as Zimbabweans. Here, this constitution is treating white South Africans as white South Africans.
As
You
South
know.
Africans.
Yeah, the other ones, the Zimbabwean one was treating white Zimbabweans as baggage from the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Those are white Zimbabweans, and they should have had a negotiation process and a mediation process to settle that land dispute in a way that was within the constitution and civilized. Here, this has been obliged within the constitution, and every sort of check and balance is involved.
Yeah.
Right? Land reform has been done in Malaysia. Land reform has been done in Japan. Land reform has been done in Brazil.
Yeah.
And land has been, nothing has happened. But all of a sudden here, because of a particular race and the convergence with basically right-wing interests in the White House, it is now hysteria. South Africa has gone to the. Do you know how many documentaries I have seen that have said, is South Africa collapsing?
Bro.
Is South
Oh
Africa going
my
to the dogs?
goodness.
Is
Oh
South
my.
Africa a failed state? Have you been to South Africa? Like, come on. And they're saying bad things are happening in South Africa. And you see like some white guy dancing to
I'm a
amapiano,
piano. Yeah, yeah.
and like, and then the irony of this is where you offer refugee status, and the
That's the
refugee status.
funniest thing to me because it's like, oh, okay, so you want me to leave 2,000 hectares of land, servants, wonderful weather,
A
to go
vineyard,
and
maybe,
a vineyard and just to go and chill in a cooped up apartment in the US. All right, sure.
bruh.
All
Like
right.
it doesn't make any sense
Okay.
whatsoever. You are offering asylum to people who mostly don't need asylum. Let's be
Yeah.
honest.
I mean,
Yes,
they rejected it too.
yeah, yes, land seizures have happened. They rejected it.
They
AfriForum.
rejected. AfriForum rejected
Yeah.
it.
So you have a situation where these guys went, it's almost like the boy who cries wolf. You
Yeah.
went around the whole world campaigning about how vulnerable, how much of a victim you are. And then Donald Trump gives you, he gives you the olive
Yeah.
branch. He says, okay, guys, you can come to
Le-
America. And then they're like, actually, no.
Yeah.
And this is the first this is not the first retreat that they have had, AfriForum. Because
Yeah.
initially they were like, we want you to sanction South Africa, punish the ANC. Then, no, not even punish, the first they sanctioned South Africa. And then they were like, okay, we're going to pull out of AGOA. So AGOA is the
deal.
African
Yeah.
Growth and Opportunity Act, which has tax-free imports for African goods into America to increase African and American trade.
Yeah.
So thousands of people's jobs are dependent on AGOA because there have been industries that have benefited heavily from AGOA. Many of them are owned by white people, white farmers. So you have a situation where AfriForum basically asked for punishment of South Africa. And then the wrong punishment came first, which was AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which affects a lot of white farmers who employ a lot of people. And then they're like, oh, actually, no, don't cancel AGOA because you're going to be threatening our own constituents, our own people, threaten the ANC. And then now the executive order comes. And this executive order basically asks for refugee status, preferential treatment for Afrikaner people, whatever that means. But it does say European descent. So that also means English-speaking South Africans. It means people of French descent from South Africa. All of those other people. There's a huge community, different types of European people of European descent, a big variety. So that executive order comes. And they're like, actually, no, we don't really want that order. We want to stay in South Africa because us leaving would cause. They're trying to make it sound like they're being philanthropic. Us leaving will cause instability or. Yeah, so they caused the problem. And now they don't really like the solution that Trump, who is their ideal recipient of their lobbying efforts, their culmination of years of lobbying.
Yeah.
And now they blame the South African government. I mean, this is purely their making. So it's interesting that this has come at a time when the most influential man in the White House was born in South Africa.
Yeah, funny. Yeah, and it's very interesting because when he offered them refugee status, I think I was seeing a lot of memes where people were like, okay, then you guys can leave. It was like you guys can leave, but then they were like, nah. So it seems to me like what they want to do is the US to apply some sort of pressure to South Africa such that South Africa then does their bidding. If I'm correct or not, right? Whatever their goals are.
Yeah, they just want to protect their privileges. In all honesty, there's a lot of white progressive people out there. There's a lot of white people who understand the plight of Black South Africans, Dan Koga included. Even they face the risk of being called Marxist by right wing people and so on. There's
just to be fair, there are lots of reasonable white people from South Africa
absolutely reasonable. In fact, it's probably even the majority of people our age that are white are actually very normal human beings.
Yeah.
And so like
So
the the the
it
the,
just
the
goes to show you like how small like this particular group is,
yeah,
right?
it's outsized hysteria, you know,
Yeah.
because you have a situation where you have a situation where the majority of the population are living in unspeakable conditions,
Mm-hmm.
and you are selling yourself as a victim to the entire world. I mean, you know, even when they said yeah, so the reason I mentioned Elon Musk was because Elon Musk even went further and called Julius Malema the president of the EFF,
EFF.
Economic Freedom Fighters. Yeah, the one of the largest parties in South Africa, which is Marxist, a hard left.
Mm-hmm.
He called him an international criminal, not least because he said kill the Boer. And Julius Malema responded by calling Musk a billionaire maniac, deranged, and an enemy of South Africa.
Wow.
So Elon Musk is picking fights with everyone. And this is weird because Elon Musk grew up for part of his childhood in apartheid South Africa.
Right.
And many people think that he still has those beliefs or those ideas um, because he's consistently propagating these things. But again, people also think this is just because Elon Musk. This is coming from Malema's statement that Elon Musk is angry with South Africa because in South Africa there's an investment 30% ownership quota if you invest in South Africa. So Starlink wanted to come and then like, we're not going to give away 30% of Starlink South Africa. So
Mm.
they haven't come to. Starlink is Elon Musk's sort of low orbit,
Yeah. Satellite.
universal internet
Yeah.
company, which is in a few other countries like Kenya and Zambia, but not South
Yeah.
Africa because South Africa has different laws on investment. So you can look at it in various ways. Maybe it's an Elon Musk strategy to make the South African government bend for his own personal business gains, or he genuinely just thinks that. He genuinely thinks that what's going on in South Africa is a white genocide and has influenced people around Donald Trump to think that as well. Because the basic tenets of the Lamola, Foreign Affairs Minister of South Africa, and Ramaphosa both said that the basic tenets of the executive order are devoid of fact.
Yeah.
Like the compensation, the idea of compensation without compensation is not even there. It is with compensation to varying degrees. Fine, not fair compensation, but it's there.
I mean, and I mean, if
The
anyone's
Constitution.
talking about land appropriation, should we talk about? Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, if you're talking about actual land expropriation, then what about Greenland, right?
And he also said he wanted to own
Gaza,
Palestine and
Gaza.
yeah, Gaza and move people out and so on. That kind of sounds like land expropriation, but I don't know. But yeah, also when we look at aid, there's an interesting article from the ISS today, Institute for Security Studies, South African think tank. When Trump was talking about massive human rights violations, there was an assessment of what impact it could have, and USAID South Africa also includes PEPFAR, which is like an initiative that supports the funding for HIV and AIDS prevention and management with treatment for people. We did an episode on HIV and AIDS actually, effect on Africa. It's an interesting one. So it affects 17% of the country's HIV and AIDS program. So that's $453 million. USAID also provides nearly $60 million in 2024 for climate change, gender equality, violence prevention, and democracy support. USAID is the United States Agency for International Development. Many people think USAID is a charity, but it is just an international development agency for the United States, as it states. So it is with interests of the States, right? Same way that China aid, same way that UK aid, and all of these other agencies, there has to be alignment with the interests of the country that it's giving. Trump's also, yeah. So many African countries have received aid ranging from 125 million to 500 million from USAID, and the withdrawal has caused quite a lot of concerns. Not only in South Africa, but even in other countries. In Uganda, there's an Ebola outbreak. One person has died. Around 7 cases have been reported in Uganda and some other countries. This is a new strain of Ebola which doesn't have a vaccine.
Oh,
The popular Ebola that we all know is Ebola Zaire. The other Ebola now is called Ebola Sudan. I don't know why they give them countries' names. It's not nice.
yeah.
But it's like how Donald Trump said the China virus. Yeah. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of things regarding the land reform situation in South Africa. I think the name of the game is that we should read the actual facts than actually sort of reacting. I think it also sort of illustrates the sort of culture we're living in. Of course, you know, you have people are now drawing their information from YouTube and from other source, most likely on YouTube and stuff like that. And these people are trying to get clicks and are trying to, you know, so they're also sort of, you know, just reacting simply off of, you know, um, not enough information. Yeah, and hype and that sort of a thing, and not actually diving into the facts. Um, so yeah, I think we're going to keep an eye out on this situation. Thanks, Zengia, for the history. By the way, that was really great. I really definitely appreciate that. I hope our listeners appreciate that. Be sure to keep subscribe to us, like, follow us on all platforms. Check out our podcast if you want to listen to the audio version, and stay updated. And we, you know, on our Instagram, we definitely let you know about breaking news. Here we break down the complex topics. So yeah, be sure to check us out and see you guys on the next one.
I am an African.